Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can take a look at the mental health and personality characteristics of the Joker. This is the 2019 movie. So this movie features Joaquin Phoenix and Robert De Niro. Other questions related to this would be, is this movie itself dangerous? We've kind of heard that talked about. And was it a good film? This is a good time to issue a spoiler alert. There certainly will be spoilers in this video. And to remind everybody, I'm not diagnosing anyone here. The character Arthur Fleck is, in fact, a character, the Joker, not a real person. So this film offers kind of a dark, atypical portrayal of a comic book villain. A journey through a simple but unreliable narrative. And we see it has a somewhat measured pace, leaving time for character development, which I think was part of the point of the movie. So first I'll go through the timeline of what happens in the movie and the mental health and personality characteristics of Arthur Fleck, the Joker, and then take a look at my thoughts on the film itself. So the narrative takes place in Gotham City around 1981. We see the primary character, the person who would become the Joker, Arthur Fleck. He's a clown. And he gets assaulted early in the movie while working as a clown. Some people take his sign, he chases them down, and then again they assault him. So this becomes important later on. Now early on we see that he's at an appointment with his social worker, and we learn he has a history of mental illness. He has a prior hospital stay in his history, and he's on 7 different medications. And we also see there may be some dysregulation of mood. He shows the social worker his journal and his joke diary, and she argues with him a bit, is kind of judgmental. Also, the office is a mess. There's a desk between Arthur and the social worker, so it's not really a very therapeutic environment. This isn't surprising, though, because later on we learn that Gotham City will stop funding for this program, so that social worker will not be available to him at some point. During that later conversation, the social worker makes it clear that the government doesn't care about Arthur, and it doesn't care about her either. So that's an interesting statement for a social worker or any type of psychotherapist to make. Even if it were true, it's just unusual to say that to a client. Moving on, we see an incident on the train. We see that Arthur tries to make a kid laugh and the mom gets upset, and he gives her this laminated card. And the movie never indicates this for certain, but it appears that he has a medical condition called pseudobulbar affect, known as PBA. And this is characterized by frequent involuntary bouts of crying, laughing, or other displays of emotion. These displays are exaggerated and they're disconnected from the individual's actual mood state, right? So what this means is the laughter or the crying is not necessarily consistent with how the person feels. They could be sad, but laughing, for example. It's typically caused by brain injuries or neurological disorders. It's actually fairly serious. And we see that, again, this is a medical condition, not a mental disorder. So it's not something that would be treated by a mental health counselor. Although a person with PBA could be treated by a counselor for any mental disorders that would be comorbid with PBA. A common comorbid mental disorder we see with PBA would be major depressive disorder. Now we also see that PBA is not tied to any unusual experience of emotion. The outburst can last for several minutes, and the laughter often turns into tears. We see a lot of uncontrollable crying with PBA. Now we see that Arthur has an unusual relationship with his mother. There's a routine there, like they watch television together, but neither one seems to have a lot of experience socially. The mother also seems to have an affinity for Thomas Wayne, and the Batman narrative, of course, that's Bruce Wayne's father, so Batman's father. We see that later on in the movie, Arthur is helping his mother take a bath, so they may have kind of an enmeshed, unhealthy relationship there. Another important event early in the movie is that Arthur and Penny are watching a television show featuring Murray Franklin. This character is played by Robert De Niro. It appears that Arthur is imagining that he's on the Murray Franklin show, and Murray is recognizing how good Arthur is. So Murray says if he had a son like Arthur, he would give up everything, like in terms of show business. So we see it looks like Arthur has a fantasy of success. He's looking for approval and he also believes that his purpose in life is to be a light to the world. This is presented like a fantasy, but it could also be a delusion. Again, it's not really clear sometimes in this movie what he's just kind of thinking about and what he really believes is happening. I believe this particular event, though, is really just more him fantasizing. Because of the assault that we saw early in the film I talked about before, a coworker encourages Arthur to defend himself. He actually gives him a gun. And he has an interaction with the boss just after that where his feelings are invalidated. So during that robbery, a sign was taken from him, and then he was assaulted with that sign, and the boss tells him he needs to return the sign or he's going to have to pay for it. So we see kind of an anger response here to this type of invalidation of feelings. Now, later on, we see that Arthur is working as a clown again in a children's hospital, and he's kind of dancing around, and his gun falls out of his pants onto the ground. Just stresses the importance of having a holster, right? But either way, he's fired from his job for that reason. We see later on that Arthur is riding the subway home, and there's these three men harassing a woman in the subway car. Arthur starts laughing, presumably because of, again, some sort of condition, and the three men take issue with that, and they start harassing him, and eventually start assaulting him, knocking him to the ground and kicking him. He draws that firearm and kills two of them. Now, at this point, so he kills two, one runs away. At this point, he could probably make a case for self-defense, right? This may be justified because he was being assaulted at the time he fired. But then he pursues the third man and runs him down and shoots him twice, murdering him. So self-defense on two, but then probably something like second-degree murder for the third. Initially, with all this, he's calm, then he appears shaken, then he dances around a bit, then he's calm again and confident, and has a fantasy about kissing his neighbor, Sophie. At this point, it's not clear that that relationship with Sophie is not real. We find that out later. Now, it turns out that those three men who were killed on the subway all worked for Thomas Wayne, and all three men were wealthy. So we see Thomas Wayne is on television, and he's kind of arrogant. He paints the killings as an attack on the elite. Thomas Wayne refers to the killer as a clown. This comes up later on in the movie. Now again, we see the situation as self-defense and murder. Arthur doesn't shoot them because they were wealthy. His actions were not about a rebellion or some sort of political uprising or statement. Next, we see that Penny leads Arthur to believe that Thomas Wayne is his father, right? So we kind of have a twist here in the movie. There's a conversation between Arthur and Thomas Wayne. We see that Thomas Wayne indicates to Arthur that Penny adopted Arthur during a time when Penny worked for Thomas Wayne. Also, we see here that Penny may be guilty of neglect, and we see that Thomas Wayne assaults Arthur after this conversation. So Arthur goes to Arkham State Hospital, not Arkham Asylum, but the state hospital. So this is kind of new as far as I know in terms of like the Batman narrative, and steals his mother's records. So it turns out she was a patient there at that hospital many years before, I think 30 years before that. So these records lend support to what Thomas Wayne told Arthur. So in terms of Penny's diagnosis, we see delusional psychosis and narcissistic personality disorder. Of course, delusional psychosis is not a mental disorder. They're kind of combining a few things there. They're more like symptoms of other disorders. But either way, they're trying to say that she's psychotic, including delusions, and is narcissistic. We also see that she was there because she endangered the welfare of a child, presumably Arthur, and that Arthur was adopted, again supporting what Thomas Wayne had said, and that he experienced a head trauma. And I find this particularly interesting because we know that PBA, again, is associated with head injuries. So it makes the story a little more consistent, at least for this part. Later on, we see the initials TW on a photo. Of course, anyone can write initials on a photo. But either way, we really don't know if this is a delusion, this whole story that Thomas Wayne told about the mother, or if the mother is actually telling the truth. It seems pretty clear, though, that Arthur believes that his mother was guilty of the neglect and the abuse because she is taken to the hospital for symptoms of a stroke, and Arthur murders her in her hospital bed. So as all this is going on, he's invited to be on the Murray Franklin show, right? The show that he was watching earlier in the film. And we see kind of practices for being on that show. That's important because him being on the show really becomes more or less the final kind of dramatic scene. So at this point we see that he stops taking his medication. He murders the guy who gave him the gun because that guy came over to his apartment. There's another guy that came with him that Arthur did not murder and noted that that person was always nice to him, always treated him well. We see at this point, I think, that Arthur really transforms into the Joker, right? He's confident and seems to have a sense of purpose at this point, a destructive sense of purpose, but either way, he does seem to know what he's about. He's figured himself out to some extent, or at least he thinks he has. So we come here to the big ending. Again, we see that now the Joker is a guest on the Murray Franklin show. This show is broadcast live. He asked to be introduced as the Joker, so when he comes on stage, we see that Murray Franklin refers to him as the Joker. In this kind of awkward conversation between the Joker and Murray Franklin, we see the Joker indicates that everyone is awful, nobody has empathy. Murray accuses him of having a lot of self-pity. And then we see kind of an important quote that the Joker offers. What do you get when you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash? So right after saying this, we see that the Joker murders Murray Franklin on live television. He's arrested. He's in the back of a police car. An ambulance hits that car, and he's freed. And then he seems to have the audience that he's always wanted, which are a bunch of people who are also dressed up as the Joker, right? Because his killing of those three wealthy men kind of led to this uprising. But then later on, we see he's in a mental institution, and he appears to murder a social worker there and attempts to escape. It's not clear if he gets away or not. So at the end, it gets really jumbled, I think. So what do we have here in terms of mental disorders? So again, PBA is not one of the mental disorders here. It's a physical disorder. What complicates any type of diagnosis here would be that possible etiology of PBA. The possible cause could have been a head trauma, and that head trauma could not only explain the PBA, it could explain a lot of his other symptoms. So I'm going to discuss other possible diagnoses running under the assumption that the brain injury did not lead to the symptoms. So we see clear evidence here in the Joker of psychosis, delusions. There's no clear evidence of hallucinations introduced. At this point, there are a number of disorders that these symptoms could point toward, including schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, and major depressive disorder. Because there's no real evidence of mania, like he's not euphoric, he's not happy, he's more sad, and he does seem to have some of the negative symptoms, like flat affect. He appears to be expressionless at times. I would say that schizophrenia would be the most likely here, followed by major depressive disorder with psychotic features. He mentioned that he was not happy for even 1 minute of his life, so that kind of supports that diagnosis. Of course, somebody can have both of these disorders at the same time. Another possibility here, of course, would be schizotypal personality disorder. We wouldn't see delusions with that disorder, rather perceptual disturbances. In the movie, again, it's not really clear. With the neighbor Sophie, that appears to be more like a delusion, so I'd probably move over toward delusions more so than something like perceptual disturbances and schizotypal personality disorder. What about other personality disorders? Well, the narrative is kind of confusing again with all the delusions. We don't know what's real and what's not. But running under the assumption that the mother did have narcissistic personality disorder, that would mean that Arthur was more likely to have cluster B personality pathology. So that would include antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and of course, narcissistic personality disorder. Now, the one that comes to mind first would be antisocial personality disorder because we have this criminality component featured in the Joker's behavior. As we consider the symptom criteria for antisocial personality disorder, we see that the Joker manifests repeated unlawful behaviors, consistent deceitfulness, impulsivity, poor planning, aggressiveness, physical fights, certainly murder would qualify him for that symptom, a reckless disregard for safety, same thing, murder would support that symptom. Consistent irresponsibility is a little less clear, but toward the end, certainly he seems irresponsible, and at the end he clearly has a lack of remorse. So it looks like he may have antisocial personality disorder, but the difficulty with this diagnosis is that the symptoms would have to be present to some degree for quite a while, and it's not clear if he has any of those symptoms in his history. If what he really has here is a sudden onset of these symptoms, that would really just not be believable. Personality disorders simply don't work that way. We also don't know if he had symptoms of conduct disorder before age 15, and that is required for a diagnosis. Now, antisocial personality disorder overlaps with factor 2 psychopathy, sometimes called sociopathy. And that's what we really see here, someone who's emotionally reactive, has high neuroticism, and is impulsive. Regardless of whether he meets the official diagnostic criteria, he does seem to have characteristics of sociopathy. In terms of factor 1 psychopathy, like the kind of psychopathy we would see in like a serial killer, we see some evidence of this here. Callous, unemotional toward the end, fearless dominance toward the end, but he's not particularly manipulative, and he doesn't seem to be a pathological liar, meaning he doesn't lie for no reason at all. He tends to lie toward the end for a purpose. So the Joker has some factor 1 traits, but his personality is better, I think, described here as factor 2 psychopathy. So then, of course, we get into this question of narcissistic personality disorder. Again, the mother may have it. Does the Joker meet the requirements for NPD? Well, here I think he clearly does not. He does seem to have 3 of the symptoms: a grandiose sense of self-importance, grandiose fantasies, and a lack of empathy. But he doesn't really seem to consider himself special in a sense of being high status. He doesn't really seem to require excessive admiration. He does want some, but not excessive. Doesn't seem to have a sense of entitlement. Again, as I mentioned before, he doesn't appear manipulative. He doesn't seem to envy other people, not to the degree I would expect with NPD, and he does not appear to be arrogant. So he only has 3 of the 9 symptoms required for narcissistic personality disorder, and again, we'd have to know the history because this disorder just wouldn't pop up out of nowhere. There would be symptoms for some time. We would see this throughout the course of his development. So this brings us to the question, is this a dangerous movie? Right? We've seen this kind of talked about before, as I indicated. I don't think this is a dangerous movie. Any movie has the potential for trouble, I suppose, but I didn't see this one as particularly likely to lead to violence or anything like that. More likely than a non-violent movie, to be sure, but I didn't really see it as really standing out in that way. I understand why some people are concerned about that, though. Now, moving on to the question, was it a good movie? Well, I know a lot of people found a lot of redeeming characteristics in this film. The quality of the acting on the part of Joaquin Phoenix, the screenplay, the direction, and I certainly appreciate the in-depth character study and what this film was trying to accomplish, but I didn't really like the movie. I don't think it's because the movie isn't my type of movie. Normally I would like a movie like this. I think it's because the narrative, for me anyway, appeared kind of jumbled, especially at the end. Again, with all these delusions, we don't know what's real. It's hard to really invest, for me anyway, in that storyline, being so kind of discombobulated. And the message of the movie really doesn't align with science. Specifically, I'm talking about the message that combining mental illness with an uncaring society leads to violence. I agree it's not healthy to abandon individuals with mental disorders. We certainly need more treatment available, and we need more empathy and compassion. But I don't like this narrative that connects individuals with mental disorders to violence. That's simply not supported by the evidence, and I've talked about this many times before in other videos. Another thing that doesn't resonate for me with this film is the idea that it puts out there that society should do the right thing out of a fear of violence. I would say a better message would be to do the right thing out of a desire to be kind, to help people achieve their potential, and to reduce suffering. Now, again, it's a movie. The purpose of movies is not always to contribute something to society. But in terms of entertainment, I really didn't find it entertaining either. So I was kind of disappointed with the film. One of the ways I kind of look at a movie to figure out whether I like it or not would be interest in a sequel. And with this movie, I just have no interest in a sequel. So if they make one, I'll probably watch it, but I don't really have any interest in that now. Like, I don't look at this movie and think, I can't wait for a sequel to come out. With movies that I like, I'm usually looking for a sequel, unless they really wrap it up nicely and a sequel doesn't make sense, of course, but that's one indicator for me. And again, I didn't really see that with this one. Now, one thing I did like about the movie, even though I didn't enjoy it as a film, it did bring up a lot of interesting discussions about mental health, right? So it did bring mental health back into the spotlight and opened up discussions, dialogues between people, and I think that's a good thing, right? I may not like the messages of the particular film, but at least it was, in a sense, bringing some awareness to the topic of mental illness. So I know whenever I talk about topics like the Joker, there'll be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They're sure to generate really interesting dialogue around this film and what the film was talking about. As always, I hope you found this description of the mental health and personality characteristics of the Joker to be interesting. Thanks for watching.